Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a Higher Truth production, and I just wanted to share with you what's happening in the solar system. And people don't connect what's happening today to the solar system, but if what's happening in the solar system is going to create a global food crisis, then what happens in the solar system not only affects your health with the effect of radiation, but also your ability to eat. And so what happens in the solar system is relevant to the coronavirus, especially if you look at the fact that it has modified proteins. And it's unfortunate that so much is going on about this topic, and the way the government is approaching it is mixed messages. And mixed messages are always assigned to me a red flag that somebody's not giving you the whole story. You know, when they don't add up, they don't add up for a reason. And I think there comes a time when we have to discern what is speculation and circumstantial and what we really do know. And what we really do know is what's being said by the officials. What we really do know is what we see with our own eyes. However, it's when the messages are mixed that you have to say and speculate. Why are we getting mixed messages? Why are they quarantining? Why are they declaring states of emergencies, but yet downplaying every other aspect? Why are we being told to expect isolation and quarantines as not matter of if, but when, but yet saying only now they revised the death rate down to 0.5%. Well, in Washington State, it's more like 30%. So there's mixed messages. China cordoning off a city, but we only had 17 deaths in a city of 13 million. The honest to God truth. But if this was a pandemic that was orchestrated, an Agenda 21 kind of new ushering in of the new world order, so to speak, it's related to the solar system. And if you don't know what's going on with your climate, then how do you even know what your future holds? How do you even prepare? We've seen that there's more cosmic rays in the solar system. We know it's from a brown dwarf. We could tell you right where it is. We warned you that we were going to be going into a focusing cone. We ran into tons of electrons as we hit the edge of that focusing cone, because we're going to be directly in line with the sun and the source of all this helium cosmic rays. We're going to be in direct alignment here in a couple weeks. And so you can predict what's going to happen if it's shedding helium and electrons. And as we go behind the sun, then the helium coming from that radiant point is going to be hotter and faster than the helium that's outside that alignment. The alignment would allow for maximum acceleration of these gravitationally focused ions. And they didn't start as ions. They started as neutral helium. But once they passed through the corona of the sun, they would lose their electrons and become ionized. So then what happens then? Well, that releases a lot of radiation, 180 nanometer. That releases 30 nanometer. So, and we see that those values of radiation, that quantity of radiation and that wavelength alone has been increasing even during solar minimums. So when you have increasing energy on the sun in zero sunspots, you're like, well, I thought sunspots were related to solar activity. And well, it is. But when you all of a sudden have 10 times the amount of cosmic rays streaming through your corona, you're going to light up your corona. And you're going to heat up the entire solar system. And then when that happens, especially on Earth, you end up with what? Record warm oceans, record warm land temperatures, and even record warm atmospheric temperatures. But what would drive a land temperature to 10 degrees higher in terms of its increase than an air temperature? Well, turn on your microwave. So what's happening in the solar system right now is we're going to probably pass into faster, more ionized forms of helium, and that appears what's to be happening. The simulation on the right, the main thing that I want you to look for is the particles coming from the sun that's on the right are supposed to carry those blue spaghetti looking lines that are vertical, supposed to carry them from right to left, and that just isn't happening. It's not happening whatsoever. And we see waves of particles streaming in, waves, fluxing, waves, waves, more waves. On the left-hand side, the simulation is almost overlapping the timing of the simulation on the right. And you can see, we see ejections into the tailstream of particles, sometimes at a high rate of speed, and that is in lieu of particles coming in from the right. You see flashes of different colors on the right-hand part of the simulation, meaning different densities of particles are washing through. And normally you would say these are protons. So they're kind of washing out some of the electrons, but the proton count is flat. It's completely flat. NOAA and North American Atmospheric Association and the Department of Commerce have put out reports this last week and predicting for future days that the solar activity is zero and that we are going to be seeing a flat number in terms of protons and electrons, background levels only. So then we should not be having disturbances. We should not be having reversals in the tailstream. Magnetic fields should not be traveling backwards, but yet that's what's happening. So what are those waves that are coming through? You can see them on the right-hand side of the simulation. They pulsate, 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 and sometimes they're corresponding with these ejections that you're seeing into the tailstream, and sometimes they don't correlate. Sometimes it looks like nice and consistent particle concentrations out front, and we see these nice V-shaped, Y-shaped ejections off into the tailstream. And what's creating that V shape? And when we speed it up, you can see wave after wave after wave of particle just coming through there. Now we're going to run this through again. This is about double speed, and want you to just take note of how many waves of particles are coming through. One wave after another, after another. So how could that be when there's no protons and no electrons? Well, and that's because you got to look to the other abundant element in the cosmos, and that would be helium. Helium is a sure sign of a brown dwarf, a red giant, anything that does fusing helium. And the source of that helium, we think, is just about opposite the sun right now. So this would account for kind of what we're seeing. You wouldn't see many protons because there's no CMEs and there's no corona holes. Corona holes do release helium and electrons. But when you have an abundance of ionized helium mixed in with neutral helium, you'll compress your magnetosphere, but you'll also wash out the electrons because ionized helium is missing an electron. So it acts like a proton, gobbling up some of these electrons and washing them downstream. But the reversals on the left simulation looking down upon the Earth, you can see arrows in the tailstream pointing to the right when everything should be pointing to the left. And that resistance coming in from the back side is simply electrons focused back around, tried to pass over our North Pole and South Pole, were grabbed by the Earth's magnetic field and brought back in towards the equator, where only so many electrons can fit. And when you have an overabundance, then they expel each other rather rapidly. Spike in the helium, especially downstream. So yes, the simulations pretty much agree with what NOAA is telling us. No electrons. So that means when we see crazy anomalies in our solar magnetic field or our Earth's magnetic field, it makes you wonder where all that went. So also we look at the magnetosphere standoff position, and you see some pretty significant fluxing. Most of those peaks and valleys occur in pairs. Well, and helium-3, helium-4 runs in pairs. And there could be a third helium isotope that's running slower. Electrons generally are faster than the helium and should create magnetic disturbance, but then the helium that's ionized should just wash through, pick up the electron on the way through, and away it goes. So we look at the magnetosphere, and 6 months ago, the blue and the red line, these are magnetic fields. And 5 months ago, when we were passing in between this brown dwarf, or so we theorized, we saw that that red line was almost completely opposed to the blue line, which is what you would speculate should happen. What happens to the magnetic fields if the electrons are running in the same direction? Well, then they should almost overlap one another. And that's what they do. The other thing that happens is that the ionized helium acts like a proton and picks up an electron as it passes through the magnetic field. So it's not that hard to discern what's rippling through the magnetosphere, because you have very few choices, and when they tell you there's no protons and no electrons, and the magnetosphere shows you almost an empty shell sometimes, but yet the corona is glowing brightly, it doesn't take too much more pieces of information to be able to connect all the dots. The sun seems bright white. Well, here's a white light photography from a telescope of the sun, blocked out by that occulting disk. So we saw those ejections and those reversals and the magnetic fields traveling in the wrong direction. Again, a vertical cut. Earth is coming right at you. Sun is off to the right. You can see very thin waves of particles passing, especially in the tailstream, passing through the tailstream. They are preceded by mostly minor compressions of the magnetosphere, and mainly it's the outer second magnetosphere that is absorbing most of the compression. The inner magnetosphere is a little more resistant to particle pressure. But there's no doubt, especially when we speed this up, wave after wave of particle is passing from right to left, but yet the magnetic field lines are sometimes drifting left to right. And that's because the only thing that can describe that is that electrons are wrapping back around, back towards the poles. And then all of a sudden, after having an empty shell, look how quickly the energy comes back around the Earth. This simulation measures energy, and energy created by particles. So the more energy, the more particles. But electrons give off much more energy than protons or neutral helium. And then poof, there they go again. There goes all that energy, almost like there's a force field around Earth. And so we're going to speed this up a little bit, and you can see wave after wave after wave. So it looks like we are entering that focusing cone of the source of this helium. And the helium appears to be ionized, mainly because of the way it's extracting the electrons out of our shells. Neutral helium does not do that. It can compress the magnetosphere, but it does not absorb electrons. It actually is a conductor of electrons. One of the best conductors in the universe for electricity is helium. But here's that again, that sudden disappearance of electrons. So no protons, no electrons, but we see a very unstable magnetosphere, and the only other thing it could be is helium. But helium doesn't wash away the electrons, so it has to be the ionized form of helium. If it's the ionized form of helium, then we are indeed quite possibly passing into a focusing cone of these cosmic rays. And as we get more and more behind the sun, you're going to see the helium coming through the sun at Earth being faster and hotter and partially ionized. So, and if all of a sudden the particles in the sun went flat, and those particles that collide in our magnetosphere and create cosmic rays, secondary cosmic rays, neutrons are secondary cosmic rays, meaning they came from a primary cosmic ray that collided and split. And you see the trend for neutrons over the no matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at it, the trend for neutrons, that's the bottom graph, has been for higher and higher minimums and higher maximums. And indeed, those are created by particle collisions in our atmosphere and magnetosphere. And usually what happens is a proton collides with oxygen. But in this case, there's no protons. So we look at for other cosmic rays, because a brown dwarf, if it's in our neighborhood and has collided with iron-containing planets and silica-containing planets, then we should see all kinds of cosmic rays of these mineral metals. And indeed, at a time when we were expecting cosmic rays of iron to decrease, they increased. Again, more evidence that a brown dwarf has wandered through our solar system. So we see absolute proof in the instruments how much higher solar irradiance has become. And when you look at the cosmic rays, you look at the solar radiation, how when the cosmic rays got higher, so did the solar irradiance. And we see neutrons almost at record high, and so you can't tell me we're getting record high neutrons when there's no particles. And if they're not protons, then they're most certainly have to be majority helium, because that's the two major elements found in our universe in the cosmic ray form. So we see that even in 2017 on this graph, the ultraviolet remained at epic record high proportions. I mean, some of the stuff coming out is contradictory almost. We hear and have this stuff downplayed. But yet we see extreme measures. We see very extreme measures. And we don't know what the true counts are. So, why would we even want to try to quote them? When people say, oh, look, quarantine's helping, the death rate is leveling off. Well, they haven't been truthful about the death rate from the start. There's extremely good evidence that they were fudging the death toll. So it's all tied in, it's all related, and the time is now. The time is now, and we warned you about panic buying, and we were told you a month ago on this coronavirus situation to get your act together. And so it's important that you understand that we're seeing pictures out of China of dead people on the streets. We're seeing pictures out of China with all kinds of rough realities. Seizures. People bleeding from the mouth. So it's scary. Whatever's happening over there. Will it happen here? So I absolutely see the connection and feel the connection. And the only reason somebody would bring down infrastructure, the only way somebody would tank the economy was if there's, in fact, we were on the verge of a global food crisis. That would be a trigger for those in control to stay in control. But if it does turn out to look a lot like what we see coming out of Wuhan, what are you going to do? So then you've got to figure out what to do to survive this, should it pan out to be another Wuhan.